Our next speaker is Catherine Roebuck, calling from Idaho, and Catherine works for the city of on the City of Meridian's website, which just so happens is a Jekyll website. And her talk is about building websites for the city government. All right, over to you, Kat.
Right, so Jekyll for city government. First, I am really not a Jekyll expert, so it's perhaps funny that I applied to speak at this conference, but I'm going to talk today about how even a fairly basic implementation of Jekyll can be leveraged in a modular fashion to support a large site while improving speed, security, and manageability, because that's what I've been able to do with Jekyll. So a little bit about me. I'm a web developer for the City of Meridian. I started there about 3 years ago, and at the time, they had never had an in-house web developer. They had a couple of software engineers who provided really basic support for a legacy CMS that they installed, and then just kind of turned wild for content editors to do whatever they wanted with for a decade. And so in 2016, they hired me to sort of tame the beast. My background before that, I had just graduated college. I majored in computer information technology, so I had broad knowledge, really no deep knowledge of web development at the time. And this was a fairly intimidating task for me, but also an exciting one because it was completely open-ended. It was your job is to get the website out of this legacy CMS and then find a home for it, put it wherever you want. So while in the CMS, the website had lagged years behind web standards. The CMS itself had been acquired by another company who had stopped supporting it. They were trying to sell us on their other product. And my manager was feeling a little bit gun shy about jumping to another very similar CMS because this one had seemed like a great solution in the beginning, and then it just didn't work out over time. So I was looking for a solution that was a little bit more out of the box, in terms of out of the box thinking, a less traditional approach. And I came across Jekyll. So there were a number of issues that I was trying to solve regarding the prior CMS. Security was a concern. We were sending login credentials over HTTP. We couldn't switch to an SSL certificate until we replaced the CMS because of how our license agreement was written up. And our average payload times were close to 7 seconds. So very slow loading, highly problematic as people started to use their mobile phones more to access the site. We had over 10,000 content pages. And as I dug in, I found that over 80% of those were outdated or duplicates or very near duplicates and really shouldn't exist anymore. And then the WYSIWYG editor, as is so common, really what you see is not what you get in the end. The preview in the editor was wildly different from the published result. And so content editors who were primarily front desk administrators, administrative assistants, they were spending hours and days making minor edits in this CMS because it was really just this game of guess and check. You make a change and then you publish it and you see what happens and you hope that it's closer to what you were going for. So it was very unreliable. And then as I started to try to support these content editors, as a developer, I could access the HTML, and that gave me more direct control over the end result. But I found that even with direct access to the HTML, the CMS was adding tags and inline styles that I hadn't specified after I saved changes. And the HTML it generated was barely legible. I mean, packed with deprecated tags, bizarre inline styles, non-breaking spaces everywhere, tables used for layouts. I mean, this is all fairly common for a CMS site, for a large site that has not been well managed for a long time. And so wading through this, I came to agree with my manager that really a newer, similar CMS was not going to be the answer. So I started looking at other options, and I also learned that part of the justification for hiring me was that a web developer would cost less than a similar CMS. So I was on a budget and it was fairly small. I started looking for a solution that needed to be affordable, it needed to be developer friendly, it needed to be faster for end users, more secure, admin friendly, in this case, content editors who were admins at the city, and ideally future friendly, so that if we have to make another transition in 8 or 10 years or something, it won't be the massive production that it was this time. And of course, I had to do this while maintaining the basic functionalities that the existing site had. So I came across an interesting example. The city of Fort Worth, Texas was using a generated static site that was built with Jekyll. They were really happy with it overall. They talked about how secure it was, how quick the loading time was. The developer who primarily ran the site loved the design control he had. And they had done some very interesting and cool things with data integrations. They had a Heroku scheduler that would grab JSON data sent by their form service, and then it would push that data to their GitHub repo, where it would get picked up by Jekyll data and processed into content. So that was really neat. They had 2 main developers on the project, and I got in touch with both of them, and they were, eager to talk about this idea because they were quite enthused about it. So they had a lot of praise for Jekyll, but they also mentioned a couple snags they ran into along the way. One was how to support content editors. They ended up training the content editors to make their changes in GitHub to markdown files, but there were a number of people who found that difficult, overwhelming, really weren't happy with the experience. And I knew in my city that would be a pretty tough sell. Our content editors are just administrators, and they don't have any sort of web background or training most of the time. And then the other issue they had was they had quite a few pages. City websites tend to have a lot of content, and their build times were slow. They were hitting 15 minutes and up. They did all kinds of things to try to optimize that and cut down on the build times. And overall, that was just a barrier they weren't able to overcome at the time. And most of the time that was fine, but every now and then there would be an instance where that 15-minute delay to getting content updates out to the public really mattered. Now, as I was having these conversations and starting to look into Jekyll, another thing happened at the city, which was people started going rogue. They were tired of the CMS, and they started just building sites without coordinating with IT. They would go and build something in Wix or Weebly or WordPress, and this was just kind of a nightmare from a management support maintenance perspective. I'm switching between several different drag and drop website builders, installing patches and updates, and trying to make sense of the decisions that they've made. And then it's not accessible, which as a government organization is very important to us. It makes bad design easy. It makes it difficult to maintain any form of consistency and trust for end users, so that they really understand and experience that they're visiting an official city website if it's just some little one-off on Weebly. And so I heard that there was another one of these in the works, and they needed the content out pretty fast, and so that's why they were planning to just build it themselves in one of these drag and drop web builders. And so I realized I kind of had two choices here. I could solve this now, or I could solve it twice. I could either make the pages in our legacy CMS and I'd have to rebuild later. I could let the other department use their site builder. I'd have to rebuild it later. Or I could find a way to create that content on the new platform in a modular fashion so that I could roll it out before I had sorted through the other 10,000 or so pages that we had. And as you can probably guess, I went with option 3. And this led to a breakthrough in how I approached this project. I realized I could split the entire site up like this and kind of move it in these bite-sized modular chunks. So this is a microsites inspired architecture for a Jekyll site, and megasite is probably not a real word, but it seems to apply. And what I ended up doing was taking the website content. We started out with about 10,000 pages. I was able to cut that down to around 1,300 by getting rid of old and duplicate content. And then I split those pages into about 28 sections. These are by division largely, and you can see here, this is the list of my GitHub repositories. And so there's a repository for every microsite or site section. Now, naturally, I didn't want to maintain the header, footer, and navigation in 28 places. So I turned those elements into a custom Jekyll theme, packaged as gem. And it just lives on GitHub. It's pulled into the microsites or site sections through their config files, and it works very well. So this approach had a lot of advantages. The transition itself became survivable to me. I am one person supporting dozens of content editors in multiple buildings throughout the city. And all at once switchover would have been so incredibly intense in terms of training and firefighting and problem solving for probably the first several months. And we almost certainly would have had some downtime where the website was just not available to the public. Doing it in a modular fashion like this meant we had no downtime, and the switchover and the training and troubleshooting, it happened just a few people at a time. That was very manageable. It also allowed me, since I was new to Jekyll, to kind of learn as I went, and there's so many different ways to implement Jekyll, and as I went along, you know, I would kind of improve with each site section or try new things and come to different conclusions about how to structure it. And I didn't have to go back and rework the entire site each time I had a little bit of a aha moment. I was like, hey, this might work out better. I would just have to go change it like 2 or 3 places. It works really well for my content editors because it limits the content that is visible to them to only what is relevant to them. That's great. Kind of a little bit of a built-in access control thing there. It allows for really quick builds. My build times, which you'll see on another slide here, most of them are under a minute. And occasionally we hit up to about 3 minutes, but not really anything longer than that. It's a more manageable experience for me as a developer, both making the transition and maintaining it long-term. I like the error isolation. When something goes wrong that prevents a build from going through, it only impacts a small slice of the site. And it's easier for me to diagnose and resolve errors when there are fewer files that could be involved. So of course, taking it all apart like that means that at some point it has to be stitched back together. And I've used Jenkins for that. So Jenkins is a continuous integration server. And it's highly customizable, configurable. I built a very simple Jenkins job for each site section. So the job pulls GitHub every 5 minutes to check for changes. Webhooks would be cool. I just haven't set it up yet. Again, I wear like all the hats for the city website, and so I have this long to-do list of things I would love to get to, and most of the time I just can't fit it in. But in time, everything will happen. So it fetches the change files from GitHub. It builds the Jekyll site, and then it just copies the site folder to the designated directory on the web server. If something goes wrong, it sends me a Slack notification to let me know that there was a build failure, and that's really helpful because then I know right away and I can go address it. But as you'll also see, that's pretty rare. We don't have a lot of errors. So here is a screenshot of my Jenkins jobs. And the little suns, those indicate kind of build help. And you can see when it last built. You'll notice all of these are in the last 24 hours. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, because it's not that something has changed on all of those sites in the last 24 hours. I had to set off daily builds to solve another problem. And you can see when the last failure was. For some of these, they've never failed. For some, it's been months. So there was one time I decided to change some things and then go on vacation, and it broke the site and everything failed for a little while there. That was cool. And how long the last build took. So most of these are so quick. All right, so there's probably a better way to solve this, but I needed a way to alert the microsites that the theme had changed. And the way I set it up initially, unless something changed, a build wouldn't kick off. And there are some sections that could theoretically go months without content changes. For example, I work in the IT department. Most of our work is internal, serving other departments. So we have very little to communicate to city residents via our portion of the website. Theoretically, this could mean that a change to the top-level navigation of the site could take months to be reflected on pages in the IT section. And so to remedy this, I did two things. I marked each theme change with bumping up the spec version, which is listed in the theme's gem spec file, so that the microsite builds recognize that something changed, that they need to fetch a fresh copy of the theme. And then I scheduled a daily build for each microsite. So this means that when I change the top-level navigation menu, every site section will pick up on and reflect those changes to the public within 24 hours. And of course, I can make that a tighter interval if I needed to. It hasn't seemed important so far. But. So there's one more big piece to this. I mentioned that I couldn't get the admins at my city to working GitHub. I needed another solution. Oh, and here, I forgot these were in here. These are before and after screenshots of our Google Analytics showing average page load time. So I have not optimized the site for speed. There's so much left that I could improve on. But where before we were at 6.5, sometimes 7 seconds, now we're closer to 2.5. And that's just switching from a CMS to Jekyll. So CloudCannon. I found CloudCannon just Googling for options for editing Jekyll sites for kind of non-technical people. And I've been so impressed. It's sort of a minimalist CMS. It has much less built-in than a traditional CMS would, but that's fine because it does most of what it needs to do. It's easy to set up. It's developer-friendly. I prefer to work locally, but you can work directly in the HTML and CSS files and such within the CloudCannon interface. I just like using Sublime Text in the CLI when I'm making changes. So I really have only used a portion of CloudCannon's abilities, but everything I've needed to do, I've been able to do. It provides this very basic WYSIWYG editor that is really quite dependable in terms of being true truly displaying what you see as what you get. It pulls in, the way I've built the theme, it pulls in the theme for the website. And so the editing experience, it feels very sort of in context, and admins are happy using it so far. You can make any HTML tag editable by non-technical clients by giving it the class editable. I like this level of control where you can let clients edit portions of the site, portions of a page even, and then lock down other portions. It's been helpful sometimes. Awesome product, very affordable, very flexible, very customizable, and the HTML it generates is super readable, super developer friendly. I love that. We also had a lot of forms. We've kind of talked about rolling our own form service in-house, but we haven't gone off the ground with that. So we have we're using FormSpree, which has it's a form backend API and email service. You write the forms in HTML. I enjoy that. Accessibility matters a lot. Writing the form myself makes it easier to make sure it's accessible. And then since you're writing it all yourself, super customizable. I haven't done anything fancy, but you totally could. It's affordable. You know, this is one of many options. All kinds of different form services work with Jekyll. And then for calendar, I'm also interested in doing this with Jekyll data. But right now we're using Talkify, and there are many other calendar options available. For search, I'm not sure I have this in here, but we use ad search for search, and that's also been a good fit. We are a Windows shop, which most people in Jekyll aren't dealing with Windows, but it's been okay. I haven't had a lot of issues. So we needed a solution for handling redirects. There's an IIS module called URL Rewrite. It does all of that for me. It just kind of modifies the web config, and once you've installed it, it can modify the web config directly as well. So that's met our needs. So unsolved problems. I think most sites end up fighting bloat at some point. People are perhaps more motivated and interested in creating new content than in removing outdated content. And in the case of my site implementation, most people don't have access to remove the outdated content. The Jekyll setup I have has a lot of advantages, including that it makes it difficult for content editors to make the kinds of big mistakes that were common on our prior CMS. We had people who deleted entire folders of content entirely by accident on the prior CMS, and the only way for us to retrieve it was to roll the server back to the last night's backup, and we'd just lose any changes that happened between the backup and the mistake. With Jekyll, CloudCannon, GitHub, I have this amazing version control built in, and since there's no direct connection here to the server, even if clients delete an entire folder of content in CloudCannon, or a few of them have access to GitHub, if they did that there, well, it's in version history and it still lives on the server. So it's very secure, but that means that when clients try to clean up old content, it also still lives on the server, unfortunately, until I go in and delete it. I don't have a solution to that. I have an idea for kind of a script that would look for orphaned files, anything that's not linked, that exists on the web server in the designated folders that isn't linked to other content, and that I could use that as a reference for deleting. But that's one problem that is going to get bigger over time and I'll have to solve. The other one is I have given my content editors very minimal design control. They really don't have the ability to make interesting layouts themselves. And that's something they would like. Now, there is more that's possible with CloudCannon than I have implemented and taken advantage of. So hopefully with time, I'll figure more of that out. But overall, it's been an awesome solution for us. It's cheap, it's manageable for one person to make this entire project happen, start to finish. and it's been very reliable. We've been running this way for a couple of years now. So if you, like me, are a little bit new to all of this, but have a very large problem to solve, Jekyll might be your friend. Jekyll might be able to help you solve it. It worked for me. If you have any questions, comments, you can reach me at my email address, c.agnes.c@gmail.com on the screen here. Also, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk about Jekyll or web, or my main interests are actually UX and accessibility. But yeah, really glad to connect with fellow Jekyll enthusiasts. I think generated static sites are the future for sure. And Jekyll and CloudCannon are some really exciting facets of that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kit. And at the start, you said you're not a Jekyll expert, but I think what you've achieved here is very impressive. Like migrating a site that large while it's still moving, that is no easy feat.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and it was interesting what you were saying about restricting editor access as well. And that's one thing at CloudCannon that's really important to us, is giving just enough control to be able to edit things, but not throwing the whole kitchen sink at them.
Right. I have never been left with a situation where I'm like, how did you even manage this? Which has happened with every other content management system I've touched, is editors will do things I'm like, but how? And how do I reverse it?
Yeah. Have you looked into, I know you're very busy with a lot of things, but have you looked into Jekyll 4?
No. I just a little bit. I saw that it came out, but I haven't even read up on it yet.
Yeah, it might be interesting to try. Usually there's pretty minimal changes you'll need to make to the site, and some people have seen build speeds increase by 50, 60%.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that might be an easy win for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I will definitely look into that.
Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to our next speaker, but thank you so much for talking today.
Thanks for having me.